Ever since the first iteration of video games, their graphics have been constantly improving with each new generation of console. These improvements in hardware have allowed for games to look much more realistic. Modern hardware also allows developers to be creative with making a more stylized look for a game, ranging from seemingly hand-drawn characters to a cartoony theme. However, should games continue to be stylized, or is realism more desirable to the modern audience? The year is 1980. Pac-Man has released, using one of the most recognisable instances of pixel art. Consisting of a simple yellow circle with a wedge cut out of it, and 4 multicoloured circles with eyes, it cannot be denied that the character art in this game was simple. This is due to hardware limitations that won't allow for more complex graphics. However, this simplicity is even today a big appeal to gamers of all ages. At this time, 8-bit was the maximum that most consoles could process, perhaps the most famous 8-bit console being the NES. This meant that games had a maximum of 256 colours to use for the pixels. As a result, graphics of this era consisted of flat colours and very blocky characters. In 1987, the first 16-bit console was released, known in North America as the TurboGrafx 16. This was a major turning point in video games, shifting the colour palette from just 256 colours to 65,536. This opened up the door to a vast possible combination of colours, allowing shadows and lighting to be introduced to pixel art for the first time. In the modern day, many indie games opt to use a pixelated style, a good example being Celeste. This game uses pixel art to achieve a cozy feel for the game. The squash and stretch animation technique is used in the main character very often, making them look almost like a liquid. This is a clear contrast to real life, helping to emphasise the supernatural elements of the game. Additionally, Celeste develops a unique system to make the main character's hair flow extremely smoothly, with a series of circles that follow a single point. This shows the dedication that studios can go to make a game as stylized as possible. Realism is a style that began to emerge in video games in the 2000s. Half-Life 2 is widely considered to be a turning point for graphics in games, as despite launching in 2004, the characters looked more realistic than anything before. This is an FPS game, involving a combination of combat, puzzle solving and storytelling. Valve, the developers of Half-Life, would go on to make their successful Portal games, which followed a similar style, with a greater focus on puzzle solving. The portal gun introduced in these two games allowed players to move themselves and objects instantly between different places in a level that they shot the gun. These games set a baseline for realism in modern video games. After realism solidified its place as a style in video games, stylism began to emerge. This focused on using unique art styles in games that had rarely been seen or were more prevalent in other media. A good example of this is in Ori and the Blind Forest, which uses 3D models in a 2.5D setting, with colourful lighting to create a beautiful game. Stylized games have become increasingly popular in recent years. With realistic games becoming much more common, stylized games can feel like a breath of fresh air for some people. Metroidvania games are a subgenre of action-adventure and platformer games, where players require key items and abilities to navigate through a maze-like world. Hollow Knight is a 2017 Metroidvania indie game developed by Team Cherry. Its visuals are some of the most unique in the Metroidvania genre, with everything almost looking like it could have been hand-drawn. As a result, this game lies within the stylistic category of visuals. This game combines relatively cartoony drawings with dark realistic lighting to create a very somber tone throughout the game. For example, all of the characters have thick black outlines and solid colours. This helps to perfectly enhance the story of the game, contrasting the simplistic stylized characters with the dark environment. 3D graphics in games began to emerge in 1973 with a game called Maze War, in which players navigated through a 3D maze which was groundbreaking at the time. However, it wasn't until the 1990s that dedicated consoles for running 3D games were released, and widely popular games such as Crash Bandicoot and Super Mario 64 were released. This popularised 3D graphics in games, and whilst these original games looked very blocky, the quality of 3D games would rapidly improve into the 2000s. As consoles became more powerful, they were capable of loading much more in a game at once, so naturally 3D models could be much more detailed, and lighting could be much more realistic. A key argument against realistic graphics is hardware limitations. With PC parts rapidly becoming obsolete and replaced with new more powerful parts and new generation consoles being released, it can be hard for the average gamers to keep up with the latest hardware. This is an issue as with more realism in games, more processing power will be required. As a result, gamers who want to play a hyper-realistic game will have to spend upwards of £400 to be able to run it smoothly. With inflation, these prices are becoming increasingly difficult to afford, which for some people can lock new games from their favourite series behind a ludicrously high paywall. It can also be argued there is an environmental cost to this, as more hardware is being manufactured to meet the demand of intensive games. On the other hand, stylized games are often much less intensive on hardware, so the power required to run them comes from how optimised they are rather than from the graphics themselves. This means that stylized games are generally much more accessible to the average gamer on a budget. Whilst personal preference is a factor in whether stylism or realism is better, it cannot be argued that sales are vital to which art style is more viable. A good example of this is when comparing Helldivers 2 to Fortnite. Both of these games are third-person shooters that are beloved by their communities and have seen massive success since their releases. They are different in that Helldivers has a realistic look whilst Fortnite has a stylized cartoony look. Helldivers 2 has been downloaded in excess of 15 million times, which is without a doubt impressive. However, Fortnite has over 650 million registered players. Whilst there are other factors to Fortnite's greater amount of downloads, its stylized and cartoony looks appeal to many more people than Helldivers Realism. This is because younger gamers would be more appealed by Fortnite's style, which creates a much larger demographic for the game. As a result, it can be argued that stylized games are often more suitable from a business standpoint, as they make more sales and it is often less difficult and less costly to achieve their art styles. In conclusion, over the years games have drastically improved in their art styles, both stylized and realistic. However, whilst consoles and PCs have only gotten more expensive to accommodate for realistic graphics, stylism allows for practically anyone of all ages to play their favourite games. Whilst realism is undoubtedly beautiful to see, stylism often tops it in terms of gameplay experiences. In my opinion, both types of games should still be produced, however stylized games will lead the games industry on in the future.